Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love, alongside my co-hosts Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is Carol Roth, former investment banker, entrepreneur, TV pundit, and New York Times best-selling author. Carol, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, as you know, we invited you on to talk about your latest book, which you have in the background. I have my copy here too. The War on Small Business, how the government used the pandemic to crush the backbone of America. But before we get to that, I think I want to do just a financial post-State of the Union. You know, we just had State of the Union a day or so ago, and you know, I'm not blaming Biden because every president, I got to be honest, I didn't watch it because I don't want to watch any president do a victory lap and pat themselves on the back and give them more credit than they deserve for the things they did do well and credit for stuff they didn't do, right? So, but I know that they're feeling pretty good about the State of the Union, but I don't think the American citizens feel that way. So talk about what you think the state of our current economy is.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad that you saved yourself the time because it was incredibly painful to watch. But I think the best way to communicate the State of the Union without maybe having too many censors yell at us is saying that the State of the Union economically is a hot mess. And I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't know from living their lives. We have inflation at a 40-year high. You're seeing it, you know, in every aspect of living, from housing and rent to food to gasoline. Obviously, that's, you know, going through the roof. We have a broken supply chain, making it harder and more expensive to get goods and services. We have a broken labor market. The stock market is in disarray. I mean, there isn't sort of a part of the economy that is solid. And, you know, we are at the tail end of 2 years of this historic wealth transfer from Main Street to Wall Street. And it's now just accelerating with this inflation that is a permanent tax that really falls squarely on the shoulders of the average American. So it's a very, very tough time. And as somebody who advocates for wealth creation opportunities and economic freedom for everybody, I want to see everybody participate in that and be successful. It's a particularly challenging time from a messaging standpoint to tell people what they can and should do.
So, Shamika and Will, I don't know, did either of you watch this wonderful speech?
I did.
Okay, you
I
did.
watched.
So did you hear any positives? I mean, what did he say that either got you up? I know they do those things where they stand and they clap and they sit, that made you cheer, or give me something he said specifically about, you know, the state of the economy that made you go, where is he living?
I mean, all of that, because for one, he talked about how the jobs increased, and I don't think you can really take credit for it when people are going back to work after the pandemic. And then he kept mispronouncing words that really bothered me. And when it comes to the economy, though, I was thinking, am I the only one that has empty shelves in the grocery store? Because people are saying this is not true. The shelves are not empty. And I'm thinking, I normally go to the grocery store once a week. I can tell the difference. Like, you can't take this experience from me. This is not a Republican talking point. The shelves are bare and the food prices have increased. I ordered my daughter she's a vegetarian, so we got some vegan wings. She got 12. They were $23. And I'm like, that's not even real meat. What in the world is going on? So it's like, you can get up there and stand behind the podium all day long and lie. In my real life, I know how much I'm paying for food. I know how much I'm paying for gas, and it's ridiculous. And everybody around me can see it as well. People every day are complaining. My gas was $53. How much is your gas? it's the conversation. So I don't know what Biden thought he was saying up there, but this is like the land of the three or something, because he said that he didn't know where, the people in Ukraine was. He said mall instead of wall. Like, it was just all over the place. And the only good thing I would say is when they hollered USA, USA. And I thought I was at a Trump rally, so that was nice. But that was the only good thing I got from it.
Now, I wanted to see, I'm being good, because really my response should be exactly what goes in a vegan wing. But nope, not going there. So vegan wing. Oh, okay.
A lot less than went in it a year ago. Let's just say that.
Whatever it is, it's good. But I want to say to the people who say the shelves aren't really empty, I would challenge them to do? I would say, break a pipe in your house and see if you can call a plumber. Or, need some drywall, have a leak and say you need to replace some drywall, and say, you can call the guy right away. He'll come right out and to look at the problem and say, how long is it going to take to fix, and see what his response will be. He will talk about how long it takes to get everything he needs to fix something he would have fixed in an hour. So that's shameful. But Will, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, so Joe Biden, and I'm not a diehard, GOP stalwart. My basic position is that shit has to work. So I think the Republicans are better on guns and paving the roads and so on. I've had no objection to legitimate liberal issues. Healthcare can be discussed, so on. But I mean, from any rational perspective, Joe Biden's had one of the worst first years of any president. And we're seeing just an insane attempt to disguise this with this bullshit from our one-sided media, thank God the adults are back in the room. I mean, I took
really
some
adults
notes while you guys were
adults.
talking. But I mean, Biden definitely is an adult. There's no doubt about that. He's been here for a while. But I mean, all banter aside, illegal immigration is up something like 600%. That might just be penetration through into the quote unquote homeland. I'd have to check the data, but up incredibly. There's a major war that was launched in Ukraine. We keep hearing somehow that this is Trump's fault. Trump argued a lot with NATO. NATO might have been weakened a bit. Trump was president until last year, and this didn't happen. So, I mean, obviously you have to think that Biden's kind of doddering main stage presence led into this. We essentially lost a war in Afghanistan. We abandoned the battlefield to the Taliban, pulled out. There were people falling off of planes. We lost 13 good troops. More people, I don't just mean to keep going with this. Human lives are significant. But I mean, more people died from COVID under Biden than under Trump. These weren't all Republicans. The least vaccinated groups were African-American and urban Caucasian men, just city kids. Kamala Harris saying she wouldn't trust the Trump vaccine had to contribute to that. So on down the line, inflation. I mean, we're seeing stagflation again. That's something out of my field of political science we haven't really talked about since Jimmy Carter. Crime again. And these just keep coming back to back to back when you read the papers. I mean, last year we had, 20,000 homicides? That's back to 1993 numbers.
And that was just in Chicago. No, I'm just kidding.
No, we had 1,000, though. I mean, there are a few less proven murders, like identified victim and suspect, but we had 1,000 homicidal deaths in Cook County, which basically just is Chicago. So, I mean, all that stuff happened, and it's kind of hard to spin stuff like that. If you're a president, even if it's not entirely your fault, even if a lot of it rests on the local police chiefs, but if you set a record for murders, it's bad. There's not much you can say about that. You can't say crime's down. So Joe Biden kind of ineffectively spun a little bit. He blamed other people a lot. He proposed solutions, some of which might even work down the road. But you're ignoring the elephant in the room, which is that things are pretty bad right now. And one of the things
it is called the State of the Union. The current state is not that great.
Right. Well, wouldn't it be refreshing to have him pull a Gerald Ford and to come out and say, look, I'm going to be a realist. I'm going to level with you guys. Things aren't going so great. We just went through, a pandemic. We went through these things. And he can talk about, legitimately, some of the things aren't his fault. Many of them are. Many of them he exacerbated. But he could just say, here's where we are today, but here's my path forward. But instead, This idea I'm so glad that Shamika brought up the jobs guy and the jobs creation president. I mean, you shut down like a third of the economy. We have not reclaimed all of those jobs yet, and yet you're going to talk about job growth? Like, really? Like that? It's so insulting to the everyday person's intelligence to say
it gets
these
into
things.
sort of playing with numbers, though, right? I mean, so we shut down under the pandemic, so we lost. So people can say Trump lost more jobs than any president ever.
And they do, by the way. They do try and say, "Oh, look at the jobs. Like he's the worst jobs president ever." It's like, okay,
but
come on.
Trump was. I mean, but the reality is, of course, Trump was a top 5 or 6 jobs president until the global disease epidemic made everybody go home. Right. So a lot of this
wait. No. The global,
Biden is now saying he's bringing back
everybody go
all
home.
these jobs.
No, that was the ridiculous decisions, the reaction to the pandemic that made everybody go home. Let
a lot of states,
blaming.
people never really went home.
Right.
Yes. No, totally cool. But I mean, no, I'm like when Biden says I've created more jobs than anybody else, what you're doing is you're taking 70% or whatever of the jobs that were lost last year and watching them come back. So yeah, a lot of it's just gaming around. But the one final line, Biden's solutions were also all things we've kind of heard before, right? So like one of them was we need sensors and actual armed agents at the border. And at that point I was like, what? Right. And then the next one was we need to refund the police. We need to give our boys all the money that they need. And then another one is like, let's stop this virtue signaling with masks. We're moving forward on COVID. And it's just, I think Biden's read kind of the political science here.
Mm-hmm. But there was a little something for everyone, and none of it made any sense. I mean, there was this whole like economic, like circular reference that started out, we need to make more things in America, which we know is more expensive, but we need to keep costs down, but also wages up. Also, businesses need to pay their fair share. And you're kind of going like, what economic plan is this whole thing? Because it's not computing in my brain, and I went to Wharton. So please explain this to me.
Well, no, we should talk about that. You talk about the finance thing. That's what you do, and that's why you're here. And that is important. I say it all the time. Like even now, granted, the COVID thing shifted a lot, right? But even the jobs thing, Obama used to do that. Every president wants to say, look at the jobs I created. The only way you can actually create jobs in the government is to create government jobs which are going to be paid through in taxes. So you're not creating jobs, right? You can create a climate that is conducive to business, but you're not creating jobs. So when you say I created 100,000 jobs, but at the post office, what do you mean you created jobs? Or you made Bezos hire people? What exactly are you doing? So even taking the credit for that or taking the hit for that is, just like you say, it's just them taking some political lap that doesn't really affect them. But the things you mentioned there, again, I didn't watch it, but that is fascinating that I hope you're making that up, Carol. I hope he didn't actually say,
no, he literally
make
said
things
that
in
whole
America. Thing. Wait, let's walk this through, people, because Carol's a pro, but you all might not understand what Carol just said. What he said was make things in America. So the guy who's currently making your gym shoe at 12, a penny an hour, a buck 50 a day. Now we want to pay the American who's making 15, but no, we don't want to make him 15. We want to pay him 18 because that's fairer to make the same thing. So it's going to cost more, but you need to keep the cost down, even though it costs you more to make it. What was the other thing you wanted to do?
So this is, and I forgot a couple things that you made. So we went to make it in America.
Make it in America.
But we need businesses to keep their costs down and their wages up.
Right.
Okay, because wages are costs, and those don't flow through the entire system and make things more expensive for businesses that pass them on to the consumer. Then we need businesses to pay their fair share. And he also, and this you brought this up, wants the minimum wage of $15, wants more unions, and wants the PRO Act passed so that you can't use contractors. So please, riddle me how this whole thing is supposed to work.
Right. So I know there's people out there, because we get them, people who respond and say, you all are like Will said earlier, cheerleaders for the GOP. I'm not cheerleading for anybody. It's like common sense.
I'm not even a Republican.
Right. I don't think any of us are. So explain to me how that equation works. How you can do that. Just simply tell me if you are a Biden fan or if you are pro minimum wage, pro America, pro high taxes, pro union, pro all those things. You like them all in a bowl. You want to mix them up. How do you get the product without us? Keep in mind, the key was keep the cost low. Without us paying $18 for a McDonald's cheeseburger or $4,000 for Nikes. You can't do it. So they give you this verbal candy, and these people just eat it up. It makes no sense. And really quickly to crime, though, Will was talking about the murders being up, not necessarily the president's fault, and it's not. However, you can't spin that rhetoric. It's shocking that you all told me that he said that we need to refund, which is great that he did it, but he was silent, not just for his whole year of presidency, but even during the election, they were silent on the issue, right? Either they said nothing or they supported the people who were, throwing Molotov cocktails, who were, bailing people out for rioting, all that stuff. They were supporting that, right?
Charles, there's a montage going around Twitter right now of all of the Democrats who stood up and clapped and went, "Oh, that's so great," all saying defund the police. Like what? Like literally like 7 minutes of defund the police, defund the police, defund the police. Then he goes and he said it. He said it like 3 or 4 times in a row. We need to refund them. We need to do it. Everyone's cheering. And it's like, we all have you on video. Like, did you think that we lost the video? Like, this is
it's
so
like the internet is not real.
It's one of those, like, we were never at war with East Asia moments. Like, that whole thing where he was like, what we need is a strong, secure border. We need to not panic about COVID, and we need to refund our boys in blue. I mean, Carol's absolutely right. Like, the internet makes it just implausible to be a BSer at that level. But that's for us. Like, I mean, we all have degrees and stuff. I mean, the average person listening to this who engages with politics maybe 3 or 4 times a year, and the way I engage with the Catholic Church, is probably just thinking about this like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Good job, Uncle Joe. So that's why politicians do this. Last quick sentence here. They're all liars, of course. I mean, like, if you've ever read anything Trump wrote, like, I was a young businessman who was not unfond of sex and bourbon, and I've read Donald Trump's books. I mean, like, where he talks about, like, orgies and how dodging herpes was his Vietnam, and he's got a gold toilet in his penthouse New York apartment that makes my Chicago one look kind of rustic. And then this guy's out there like, yep, I'm a real down-home American. It's just like, you kind of want to sort of Sandman these dudes off the stage, but it's what they do. They lie in Caesar-like speeches so that people vote for them.
No, you're right. I was talking to Shamika earlier. Remember, Shamika? And I said, well, I don't go to bat for any politician because half of them are corrupt and the other half haven't figured out how to be corrupt yet.
Right. And
it's only a matter of time.
Also, like, just literally almost all women are, for whatever reason, somewhat better at this. Somewhat. I mean, I've had some interesting conversations.
At not being corrupt or getting away with it.
Almost all upper class male leaders are sociopaths. This has been shown over and over again with all these books like The Psychopath Next Door and so on. So I tend to really distrust people who want to have their finger on the nuclear button, like, all humor aside. Like, when you look at Trump or Hillary or, like, the Biden family, the Klan, Hunter, and so on, I mean, you're not really looking at the best of humanity. And it's worth keeping that in mind.
We're going to get to the book soon. Carol talks about how we're not sending the best. I remember that part, and that's true. And but one last thing.
I'll carry the show myself.
Well, so if he actually said those things, and I trust you all are honorable people, but if he really said the border, the refund, and all that stuff, I have not been one. Check my Twitter, check my writings. I don't get into the political games. I have been not been one making fun of Biden, calling him senile, and all that. However, he may have walked out there and for a moment thought he was a Republican.
No. See, you have to see the whole speech because most of it was this. It wasn't even a State of the Union speech. It was actually a campaign speech with his giant wish list from Build Back Broke on down. That all the things that we need to fund and we need to spend on, and then like every once in a while he'd throw in these things that, but again, like in context that made absolutely no sense with the reality of the rest of the things he's talking about and any of his action. I mean, it was literally, I'm not one to ever get in the way of anybody's job. Like, I don't like to, call for firing people, but whoever wrote that speech should have been fired because it was just word salad, the whole thing.
Well, real quickly, Shamika. Go ahead, Shamika.
He said, we need to refund the police. Fund the police. Fund the police.
Maybe it was a call and response.
He said it more than one time.
Maybe it was a call and response.
Oh my God, he said it.
You say fun. Read.
It was like a preacher. Like he was ready for them to say, amen. hallelujah. Like
Right.
he said it over and over again. But like he got the claps and just kept saying it again and again. And I was like, oh my God, this is so rehearsed. And he's a bad actor. It was terrible.
Well, I don't know. Everybody, I mean, I don't know. One, I had somebody a tweet I responded to. I said, really? Somebody tweeted that it was a wonderful speech. But on the other side, obviously you think liberals would like it more than conservatives. But, I mean, talk about people not that bright. But Charles Blow, I don't know if you all saw that, but he and a lot of the true, hard left people, they were complaining. You get this. I don't know if you all saw Blow and the others. They were complaining because he didn't say black enough. They was like, even when he said HBCU, he only said the initials. He didn't actually say the B. So they were upset because it wasn't black enough. It wasn't left enough. It wasn't, woke. So I guess it's all about the perception.
It was a bad speech. It was a bad speech overall. And the only people who could possibly say that it was good is somebody who has absolutely no idea what's going on and wasn't paying attention, or the media who's just propping him up and is going, oh, this is the day he became president. What a powerful unifying speech that brings us all to, they're saying BS that they always do. But objectively, and like I said, I'm not really a fan of the pomp and circumstance, and I tend to be a principles over people, kind of person. But objectively, it was a horrendous speech, and it was delivered poorly as well. So,
see, that's the reason why I say, to not sound like a partisan, I'm like, anybody who gets excited about a State of the Union speech, there's something wrong with them. But, again, we got to get to the book. So the book is The War on Small Business. And so why did you write that book? I mean, I understand that COVID and a lot of the things that the government was doing even before COVID, I'm going to be sarcastic though, were bad for small businesses. But there's only 6 or 7 small businesses out there. Most of the businesses are big. So why write a book about a war on those, the 500,000 people that work in small businesses? I mean, they're not the backbone of America, right? So why the book?
It's interesting. I was approached by HarperCollins to write something very early on during the pandemic because they knew it was going to be a historic economic moment, and they wanted somebody to capture it real time that wasn't just going to give talking points, but was actually going to follow what was happening and give a real breakdown. So I went into it not having a specific thesis, but just doing the research and kind of identifying what happened. And I really wrote about 3.5 different books during the pandemic. And this is the one we landed on because it really was this underreported story, and one of the most important stories. As you alluded to, most people don't understand how important small business is. I mean, before COVID, about half the jobs and about half the GDP, currently about 31.7 million small businesses, 6 million of which have employees approximately. So this really is an important part of the economy. It's an important job creator. It's an opportunity for wealth creation for the average American. And it really is that symbol of economic freedom and do it yourself. And so the fact that we had a situation where the government came in and used this, like, we're all in it together BS, when we weren't, when they decided they were going to pick winners and losers and decide who was going to thrive and who was going to fight to survive, based not on data and science, but based on political clouded connections. And that enabled the most historic transfer of wealth, or as my friend Glenn Beck likes to say, robbery of wealth from Main Street, to Wall Street and the already wealthy and well-connected. It seemed like a really important story to talk about, and not just talk about it in the context of small business, but on capitalism, freedom, economic freedom, and what that means going forward and kind of how we got there. So it's really a much more than a book about small business, but it uses that to get into the broader struggle of decentralization versus centralization, and the kind of overreach of the government in general, which I think is what we're all talking about. Like a lot of these things, it's not about, who's in charge. It's going to get screwed up either way because the government is too big. And as Will said, there are a lot of sociopaths, and, human nature takes over, and you're never going to make those decisions under central planning that you can make in a free market based on the decisions of, millions, 100 millions, or maybe billions of people. So, that's kind of the underlying theme of, why I wrote the book and what it's meant to talk about.
I know we can get into some of the problems that COVID caused as we go through, but I think that's really the key, and that's more important, to talk about what the government does, both by cronyism, which we talk about, but also just sheer incompetence. It's like very few. I mean, people who are smart, though. I'm not gonna. I mean, everybody's not, but the people who do know economics really well, most people don't operate something as big as this. And you try to predict the predictive models and things of that nature, but to put a handful of people in charge of pulling levers and thinking that they're going to control everything right every time. And when something happens in France, we know exactly just how softly to pump the brake and when to hit the gas. It's just asking too much. So I would think, even though I didn't really agree with them at the beginning, that the intent of the central bank model, whether it be a strong federal treasury all the way back at the beginning when Hamilton and others were discussing that, and obviously 1913 and starting Fed, that whatever those intentions were, you go forward 100 years, what they're doing is totally different. Like, well, let me ask you this question: would you think that the people who pushed for that in the early 1900s would look at what's happening now and say that's exactly how I planned it?
Well, so let me answer it this way. So it was started with nefarious intentions, and I talk a little bit about that in the book. The people who created it were those who were on the inside, who didn't feel like they had enough power and control. So they created this entity with this guise, this cloak of independence, even though it's not truly independent at all. And why would we have an independent entity control the monetary policy in things like jobs and inflation in this country? It doesn't even fundamentally make sense, let alone that if they make a profit, they give it back to the U.S. Treasury. So it's not really, it's like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge independence. So they did it in a sense to have that control. But at the time, I don't know that they could have imagined the scope of what the government was involved with, and then how much power because of that the Fed would have. I don't know if they would imagine us going off of the gold standard. And so this idea that we have fiat currency that, saw $6 trillion printed, and the monetization of trillions more of overspending from COVID relief, quote unquote relief. I don't know that they would have really projected that, but they probably would have been thrilled that their guys were the ones that were in control. And the idea, like you said, if you think these people are the smartest people, which we can debate that, but I will say the smartest people either didn't know or completely lied about all of the outcomes here. They told us that inflation was not going to happen. Oh, it's going to run a little hot. Oh, it's transitory. Oh, it's good for you.
It's good.
Okay, it's here to stay. They literally in a press conference said they didn't see the disruptions to the supply chain and the labor market, which I saw day one, and many other people that I talked to saw. So it's like, if you are the ones in charge of this and making multi-trillion-dollar decisions and you're not seeing it, it just says to us that those people shouldn't be in charge. And there are many mechanisms. Milton Friedman talked about, expanding money supply in concert with growth of GDP and just having a formula. I mean, there are many ways to manage monetary policy and not have these crazy decisions and these crazy actions that have done so much damage and transferred so much wealth. So, I think that is a key point. And it's one of those things that the average person doesn't understand. And it's why I spent a whole chapter on it in the book.
Right. And let's not forget that the last piece of the inflation is now that it's caused by Russia and Ukraine.
Of course, yeah, that started 2 days
ago. It wasn't happening a year ago.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Shamika.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you tell us what happened to all the change? Because one day we had change, and then all of a sudden, all the
We're not out anymore, though, are we? I know we were out for about 6 months.
I'm still going in places and they have a sign up that says there's a coin shortage, and I'm trying to figure out what happened to all the coins.
Yeah, so just in general with currency, a lot of that doesn't end up in the U.S. A lot of that ends up in foreign entities. My guess is it's probably a scenario where, because we shut down our borders and we didn't have people who were moving around as much, there was that same kind of wide circulation. So, and there may have been other issues why they slowed down the minting and whatnot. But yeah, that's just sort of like a bizarre side outcome of all of these other things that they put in place.
Another question.
Sanitizer.
Right. So I don't really trust going to like this cashless system.
No.
So
No.
Okay.
Good instinct.
Everybody just wants to take things now. No cash. Even going to my kids' soccer game, no cash. Everything is just done online. And it strikes me as something we need to be worried about.
Yes, so everybody should lobby to keep cash and to keep hold of things. What they're trying to do is march us towards a central bank digital currency. Now, this is different from a cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and I think it gets conflated a lot, where cryptocurrency isn't controlled theoretically by anybody. It's on the blockchain. It's very transparent. It's peer-to-peer. It's not controlled, and that's the key. It's decentralized. A central bank digital currency is now putting the government directly in charge of everything that you have and giving them control, to the point of, well, we don't like the fact that you said this online. Oh, you ate too many burgers this week and we're trying to help climate change. So we're just going to shut that off because we have control of your money. And I know it may sound far-fetched, but it's already happening in China. These ideas of these vaccine passports and these other things about controlling what you can and can't do is the precursor to that. There's actually a link you can go to on the Federal Reserve site right now. They are taking comments for pro and against a central bank digital currency. So we need everybody's voice to go there and voice your opposition to that. But it is the absolute worst thing that could happen, because if you think you're getting deplatformed now by big tech, if the government controls every dollar that you have, we're all really, really screwed.
Yeah, well,
I think this is the sort of the not at all jump in there, but this is Carol spent more time, more successfully in business in the markets than I did. But I was there for a while, and this is the worst idea I have ever heard. What you're moving toward is a Chinese-style social credit system here. And I don't think a lot of people that haven't, some of the research I've done, as you guys know, is looking at sort of the left and right fringes. That's how I got in those alt-right debates and so on. And what's happening to people working for edge platforms like VDare on the one hand or Jacobin or the other is already insane. Like Nick Fuentes and those sort of cats can't get on a plane. There's collective monitoring that begins with the fact that your credit cards and so on are linked to a name, to a social security number, and to an address. And this is going to be the next stage of that. The government could track every purchase that you make with a governmental digitized currency. And there'd be nothing at all to stop. Like right now, you're seeing Biden and others talk fairly openly about sanctions for COVID misinformation on the internet. The idea is this whole Skynet of observation of you. Now, I will say big data is pretty stupid. It won't work all that well. Like in China, everyone just has a VPN and Tor on their computer, but it's still a god-awful idea. And this is one of the biggest reversals of my life, by the way. Businesses going from cash only everywhere in Chicago and every other major city, every store, every bodega, to no cash. Flash your digital credit card here in the corner store. And when the government takes over this from the corner store, we're really in trouble.
We really are. And I want to...
Go ahead, Carol.
I was just going to bring in the Russian sanctions to this because it's relevant to see what's happening. Right now, Russia has a ton of their money in foreign currency sitting with different central banks, including the Federal Reserve, the ECB, the Japanese central bank, so on and so forth. And one of the things they've done with these sanctions is, Russia, you've invaded. We are now going to freeze your assets and you cannot have access to them. Now, we would all sit here and go, oh, well, Russia did a bad thing, and so it would make sense that they can freeze their assets. But you don't want the government to have that same level of control over you and make the determination that something that you've done they deem bad for whatever reason, whether or not you say, well, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to invade a foreign country. That's not the point. And once you lose the principle, it all spirals downhill. And we've seen that, with the president of the United States was thrown off of one of the top social media platforms. So if you don't think that it can happen to you, I think that you're, incredibly naive about that. And it's one of those things that we have to fight, because if we lose that fight, we lose freedom 100%.
Right.
Have you guys seen the Russian subway?
No.
No, Bernie Sanders said it's really nice, though.
No, I don't mean
not being able to get on the
great
train.
line, but I don't mean like the quality of the train. I mean that when the government or the major corporate oligarchs start enforcing these penalties together, doing anything becomes impossible. So like apparently Apple and Microsoft got together to take down like WePay and Cash Wallet, Cash App, PayPal, all that in Russia. Moscow is a city on par with almost any here in the USA.
Correct.
So people were used to tapping their card, their Ventra or whatever, and getting on the trains. Now that's not possible. The entire subway system is shut down. It doesn't accept any wallet, any digital pay, credit cards. So people are digging out like old 5-ruble notes and putting them in the machines. And the lines, the queues are blocks long because corporate America just shut down their city. And it would be easy to do that anywhere at any time.
Right. So 2 quick points to that. One about one funny little silver lining. But you talk about Russia, since we're talking about financial ramifications of things. Every action has a reaction. So like you say, you understand why you're putting these sanctions on Russia. They deserve it. They shouldn't have done this. But, these are the same people that are all like, global economy is great. They want the one economy. They want to be able to ease of business across the world. Fine, right? But now, so you shut off Russia. Russia's not small. Russia has exports. Russia takes a lot of imports. They spend a lot of money. So now they can't buy anything. You freeze the assets. That'll punish them. But a lot of people rely on their business, right? So what happens to all those people who can't get the product that they get from Russia, or the people who can't sell because 80% of my business, I'm not Russian, but was selling into Russia, and now they're shut off. So now I just lost my business and I have employees. So talk about how this isn't just hurting Russia like they're acting like it is. Because I'm sure I didn't watch the State of the Union, but I'm sure he made it seem like he's crushing Russia, which is fine, and no one else is being affected.
But and also, just think about the statement of that crushing Russia. Like, you're crushing the people of Russia, who, by the way, most of them don't feel comfortable standing up and speaking out against Putin because they think they're going to get poisoned or shot to death. So you're now hurting these people who don't have the same freedoms that we currently have, at least at some level here in America. You're not actually hurting Putin himself, like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe you're getting some blowback, but that's who you're hurting. You're hurting those individuals who they didn't want to invade Ukraine. They don't want to be at war. So you're just focusing it on people, and they're the collateral damage and all this. And like you said, that flows through the world economy and impacts a bunch of other people as well. And we're all going to pay the price for that.
Yeah. And then the quick funny thing is that, and then I'm going to Shamika, is that, that they say that a broken clock is right twice a day. Well, this is the only time, maybe the only time in history I've ever said that. The one positive of the anti-racist is that they're the only ones that may slow down this cashless society. Because remember, Amazon opened those stores where you can just walk through and pick your stuff off the shelf and walk out, and they'll charge you, and it was all cool, and everybody, this is sleek, I like this. And then the woke came out and said it was racist because blacks don't have ATMs and credit cards, and so they can't use the store, so it's anti-black and it's anti-poor. And so I don't know if they did it everywhere, but the stores in New York take cash now.
I made this point on Twitter. I said, you're going to tell me that it's racist because people can't get an ID to vote, but you're going to force them into a digital currency but not think that that's racist? Please explain the mental gymnastics involved in making that one work.
So maybe that will get a little bit of pushback. We don't really like them, but we'll use them as an ally on that. What were you going to say, Shamika?
Yeah, no, just that quick. I was thinking about the drug dealers, like, that just take cash. How are they going to?
No, they gonna get one of them. They gonna get the Apple Pay thing. They just just go ahead and tap
crypto. They'll go to crypto.
I was like, wow,
they'll go to crypto.
I was.
Well, escorts and sex workers went to the payment systems like 2-3 years ago, from what friends tell me online. So it's the drug dealers will manage.
Here's what they'll do, because I'm an entrepreneur. So they'll sell you this box, And the box, it's a special box, and the special box costs $100. That's what
Yeah.
And weighs 1.25
exactly.
grams. Who knows what's in it? I mean,
It's a mystery box. It's like it's fun. You can open it up and find out inside. It's like a surprise in every box.
There you
Yeah,
go.
one of the things that frustrates me is that I feel like, especially at the height of the pandemic, I noticed people were saying things like, you all are thinking this is some type of conspiracy. They want you to spend money. They're not trying to shut down businesses because they want you to spend money. And it was like they didn't recognize, of course they want you to spend money, but they're shifting where the money is spent. If you have small businesses that are closed, of course you're going to order from Amazon. I noticed just myself, like even ordering something like black seed oil that I used to get locally from small businesses, I now order from Amazon because it's just easier and I can just use my card is in the system. But I'm like, these things that I notice, it seems like people aren't really noticing that. And they had no problem with small businesses being shut down, whereas I could see that this was a problem. And I was thinking, how come Walmart is open, but the mom and pop store cannot be open? And a question that I have is, when it comes to Ukraine, I get that people, may be suffering, blah, 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 blah. How is this affecting America? And why do we feel like we need to sanction Russia because of what's happening in Ukraine? Like, why do we have a vested interest in this is my question.
Okay, well, let me before I answer that question, let me go back because I think you said some really important things and I want to underscore them about shutting down certain businesses. What the government did was really clever, because if they had shut down all of the businesses and they hadn't come in to support the stock market, you had Walmart closed, you had Amazon's warehouses closed, you had everybody closed. I don't think this thing lasts 2 weeks. I think everybody's screaming, all these power, you can't shut us down, we can't get anything, whatnot. So they went to the folks who didn't have the power and they left everyone else open. And then they went, oh, we had lockdowns. Oh, we were all in this together. Well, no, that's not the case. We weren't all in this together and you didn't lock these guys down. And like you said, it shifted not only the revenue dollars from small businesses to these big companies, but then the stock market, with the Fed intervention and propping up in the stock market, it expanded the multiples of those companies. It expanded their values. It allowed them to access capital more cheaply. You had 7 tech companies during 2020 who gained $3.4 trillion in value, which, by the way, was almost the same amount that was printed during that time. Go figure. And so, it's really, really nefarious the way that they ended up doing it. And like you said, I don't think people realize it, but you do have to change your habits. I mean, it's the one thing that you can control is go back, support the small businesses where you can, use cash if you can, even if you want to use your credit card, okay. But start to push back on some of these things, because if you're just willing to give them up, that's part of capitalism. And it's going to have implications. As for the Ukraine, I am not a foreign policy expert. I'm somebody who will weigh in on the economic realities of the situation. But they are an ally, and in the world that we live in, having somebody come in and aggressively try to take something that isn't theirs and kill a bunch of people is not something that is good, and we don't want to encourage that. And so to turn a blind eye to that and to continue to transact is a challenge. Now, that being said, a lot of this is smoke and mirrors, because the reality is most of Russia's economy is built on the exports of things like oil, which it sounds like, at least as of today, they're not really touching. So a lot of this is, kind of this veiled dance. Oh, we're doing something, but I'm not sure how much we're doing it. But it's a very hard needle to thread, because if they do it not enough. It doesn't have an effect. If they do it too much, then their alliance with China becomes stronger. China's already said that they're not going to step in with the sanctions. We know that China and Russia want to create this new era and this new global dominance, and it could really play into that. So this is, again, beyond my pay grade and my expertise, but that's kind of my only add to the conversation on that.
Well, I want to end back on the book. There's a lot of good things in it. You should buy the book. You write about some heavy stuff, but in a way that people can clearly understand it. But what I liked the most and what I thought was most important is the capitalism part, because Will and I did a whole podcast with someone that wanted to have both of us on to kind of debate the merits of capitalism. And when you and I spoke before, I said that there's a problem with it, and it becomes hard because most people aren't, skilled enough to do it in a sense in understanding both what it is and what it is not. So talk about what capitalism is and what it is not. What you talk about, the cronyism and things of that nature, that people say, well, I don't like capitalism because it does this. And when you flesh it out, well, that's not really capitalism, that's theft. So that's not capitalism. It's, taking nepotism or taking care of your friends. So talk about capitalism.
So I look at capitalism versus central planning on a spectrum. So basically on one side, the capitalism side, it's freedom, choice, and transparency with the guardrails of property rights. That's it. You've got all kinds of people using their free will, their free choice, and that determines the outcomes. But it has to have the protection of property rights or it doesn't work. As you take those things away, you move along the spectrum to central planning, which has, force, coercion, control, a lot of opacity, and usually just a handful of people making those decisions. So, that's the spectrum that we're on. There's no pure capitalistic society. There's always elements, but as we move, more towards that, you do better, and you move further away from that, you do worse. We've seen that around the world throughout all of history and all of time. So, there's plenty of data that supports that. And I think where people get confused is they say things like, just because something's a private enterprise doesn't make it capitalism. If there isn't that element of competition and free choice, if a handful of people are making the decisions, if the government's tilting the playing field, anti-competitive legislation, all the barriers that they create, that's favoring one group of people, that in no way resembles capitalism just because there happens to be a private entity involved. And I think that's where people get confused. So I try to stick to the key concept and principles of what we're talking about and just looking at that fluid spectrum so that people can understand it a little bit better.
Okay, so let's clarify. So you got a legal business, they're selling their widgets, and they use a lobbyist to provoke Congress to pass a law that benefits their industry or their company over someone else. Is that just plain capitalism?
No, of course not, because that's not using the free market to make the decisions. That's having a handful of people in Washington tilt the playing field. So that is central planning / cronyism making the decisions. And that's...
I got another one. What if you close businesses because, I don't know, just make something up, but there's a virus out there that might make some people sick. So you don't want the people going out the house. You want them staying in the house. So you close businesses to keep them safe. But you let certain businesses stay open, and those businesses, kind of become so much wealthier than they were before, and the other business can't afford to stay open and they close.
Yeah, that's
capitalism's bad, right?
Yes, that's very, very capitalistic. The worst part about this is, there's a concept under the Constitution and the Fifth Amendment called eminent domain. And basically the government cannot take your property for the quote unquote public good without appropriate compensation. And that's the big issue here, is that if they were going to make the claim of eminent domain that we're going to take your property for the public, it's for the public good that we have to shut you down, they would have to compensate those businesses appropriately. And the crumbs that the small businesses got from things like PPP and some of these very small relief efforts were not only a fraction of the overall relief dollars, but certainly not enough to be that due compensation standard under eminent domain. So, there is potentially an argument to be made. I mean, again, there's no argument to be made because it was not based on any data and science, but if they felt they had to do something, that's a way you could do that within the realm of protecting property rights and looking a little bit more like capitalism, but that's certainly not what happened.
Well,
So what
Shamika, any
should
last final?
businesses-
There you go, Shamika. Go ahead.
No, what should businesses have done
Sue.
that were forced? Okay.
Sue. I mean, I chronicled a few in the book. There were businesses that just said, screw you, I'm going to open. And we had, we saw even in Texas that was supposed to be, the state of the free. We saw a small business owner go to jail for opening up her hair salon. PetSmart down the street could groom your dog's hair and nails, and that was okay. But, she couldn't safely operate, her business. So they should have sued. They should have banded together and just said no. There's power in numbers, and there's certainly enough small businesses to just say, no, we're not doing this. The amount of people who just kowtowed to this whole thing is, to me, the biggest surprise that came out of COVID, and is certainly not a good thing for the future of the country, because it showed both internally and externally how weak the American people are in terms of their rights and freedoms.
And I'm in New York now, but in Chicago, didn't some restaurants do that? Pritzker said that if they had to close, and they just decided out in the suburbs they were just going to close. Be open.
Yeah, I mean, there are instances around the country, and there are lawsuits. There's some great folks, Pacific Legal. I was in a documentary called Prohibition that they put, about one of these bars that was, they tried to shut down in Kentucky, and they're suing. And so, I mean, that's the course of action. We have protections under the Constitution, and what they did was completely non-constitutional in any way, shape, or form. So we have to stand up for these things. And, frankly, they could have gotten a lot of us to go out and rally around and go, yeah, no, leave them open. Doesn't make, I could look down the street. I see Walmart's open. My small business is important and they're staying open. And it just didn't happen.
Will, did you have a last financial? I have one more question, but it's not finance related. So,
well, my question's not really financial. It's kind of an extension of what, Carol, what you just said, and Shamika's question. Almost philosophically, why do you think this was? This is one of the things that baffled me, quick intro, about COVID. Other than basic things like protecting seniors and getting the vaccine when it became available, I didn't really do much of anything about COVID. I was aware of what my risk was. I spent a lot of time playing basketball, working out. I mean, in Kentucky, we went back to work pretty rapidly. But when I looked at other states, especially my friends in the blue states, people seem to be almost reflexively following this series of kind of CDC orders that made as much sense as like hokey pokey directions. I mean, and you're right. Very few small businesses sued. Very few churches sued or just opened up. I mean, you're not going to get that visual of the police going into a church and batoning people. People just kind of went along with this, and it went on for years.
Right.
In like Bowser's DC, for example, they're still doing this. The kids can now take their double mask off outside, but indoors they're double masking, although the CDC has said this is no longer necessary. Why did the demo for this is like ordinary middle to upper middle class Americans that live in cities specifically. Everyone else just kind of went out their life. Why did that group of people go along with this for 2.5 years?
I mean, there's this theory about mass formation psychosis, which I don't know if my explanation is equivalent to it, but mass crazy. And I think that
more technical.
Yeah. I think that's the medical
Fancy
term for
talk.
it. But I do think that social media, the division of the country, virtue signaling, fear, like there were just so many weird things that all came together at the same time that allowed people to want to do this. And then also there are a lot of people who just weren't impacted by it. Carol Markowitz coined a great phrase called the pajama class. And that was the people who could, pick up and work remotely from home. And they loved that. They didn't have to go to the office. they could wear their PJs, they could stay home and, screw around during the day and still get paid or whatnot. They weren't the frontline workers. They weren't the people working at Target who had to do this. They weren't, the police or, the EMTs. And so, those are a lot of the quote unquote thought influencers in media, in social media. And so it was to their benefit to drag this out as long as possible. I mean, I had a tweet that I sent out many, many times that said there are a lot of powerful people who don't want this to end. And so when it starts at that level, anybody who wants to kind of be on that team or on the correct side, and of course it was the correct people, the good people who were pushing those things. I think it made it harder from sort of a tribalistic standpoint to even think clearly. I mean, the amount of just insane gaslighting, like you said, the common sense of when they opened up bars in New York City and said, you can only open up as a bar if you serve food. So they served a couple chips and they said, no, you can't just have chips, you must have dip. How does dip prevent COVID from getting you? I'm not fundamentally understanding that queso has healing properties. I mean, I love it, but I'm not familiar with its healing properties. So just the number of different things like that, where you could just point out to people, this is literally insane. And nobody who's thinking rationally could believe this. And they still just were no, people are dying. This is horrible. And it's just mass crazy.
Yep.
Yeah,
they call them Cuomo chips here. They call them Cuomo chips, Tamika. Cuomo chips.
Wow.
And
Will, earlier, heals only the soul.
Earlier, Will, I was telling them that, here in New York, they ended the mask mandate across the board. And there was actually a protest today saying, mask us, mask us, mask us.
They need permission.
It really is just completely bizarre.
Not even let us wear it if we want to wear it. No, we are out here marching to make everyone else put one on.
No, I got it. And I think that when we're all focusing on this one demographic that was doing this, I mean, one of the interesting things in society is that when I do research, I find that the people that think they are the most informed, again, upper middle class,
highly
urban,
educated,
very liberal,
highly
white
educated,
women in particular,
yes.
but no hate. Black Americans police do crazy stuff too. Government created AIDS and so on. But this one demographic that includes all of these groups thinks that they are getting the true information from MSNBC and believes the craziest stuff in the world. So I told you about that project some casual acquaintances of mine worked on where they found the average. What is it? The average liberal or very liberal person believes that 10,000 unarmed black men are shot every year by the police. 1,000 to 10,000, no reason to exaggerate it. But the real figure's 15. I mean, it's just over and over. This kept coming up during COVID. Kex TC, the big European consultancy, surveyed, again, urban women, basically, if you look at the demo, and they found that the average person thought that 9% of the country had died of COVID.
Yeah.
1 in 10 people was already dead, and that directly was the reason people supported lockdowns and so on. It was just crazy panic. If you gave the actual figure 1 in 1,000 or whatever it was then, everyone would have said, oh, that's terrible. That's probably going to be the 5th leading cause of death this year. Let's go back to work and wear masks around elders or something. I mean, it would have just been a totally different, logical response, but we never got there.
Well, the crazy thing is, too, just the way they treated the kids and the data around the kids, because if you go back to the flu, the last couple of years before COVID, how much more deadly that was for children than COVID was. And so now the question is, well, why did you not shut down the schools for the flu, but you're going to shut it down for something that doesn't impact them in the same way? And nobody can give you a logic. I mean, it's literally just South Park, kind of running around with their heads cut off, because there is no logic or reason or nuance. And I think that the social media dialogue and the clips and taking in a ton of information, but nothing deeply and nothing that is actually helpful, is creating people's just completely distorted view of the world.
Well, I don't want to hold you too long. I have one last question, but I have an answer for you. They do have a reason. It's called the science.
Sciencey.
Well, also
Sciencey.
The kids thing also just was another example of just bad information. So without totally walking out the stats, the total number of kids that died during the entire COVID-19 pandemic was 700. You're absolutely right. I think Carol said this, but the flu is way more dangerous to kids than COVID. So people just didn't know that. The media kept running these outlier stories like healthy 14-year-old boy dies of COVID. And it's like black people getting shot by the cops or blonde kids getting kidnapped. That was the only case like that in the country that
And he
month.
wasn't healthy,
again,
by the way. He was like 900 pounds and had diabetes.
Yes.
So like that's the other healthy 14. No, I'm not even being facetious, but it's like that's who the healthy 14-year-old was who ended up with. It was somebody who had all these comorbidities.
He was healthy because he was 14.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, he was alive. He was on the healthy side of
right,
dead.
exactly.
I mean, no, it was like I actually hesitated to say that. That's exactly right. Like one of the things one of my boys said when we were looking at these COVID deaths was just how much do these people weigh? Mm-hmm. Like former soldier, and it was an obvious practical question. Like if you look at someone who's 35 and who died of COVID-19, or for that matter of influenza, which kills like 75,000 people in a normal year, you have to ask what else was going on. It's not just that they got COVID or they got the flu and they died. That never happened. So, again, when you unpack the data, you find the real number of people with no major pre-existing conditions under 60 that died of COVID. I mean, that's in the low 10,000s probably all time. But again, that's not the picture we get.
Carol, my last question. You ready?
All right, if it's your last one, you got to make it a good one, Charles. It's got to be a good one.
Oh, it's a good one. You are known on Twitter, in addition to your wonderful
big on Twitter
finance expertise. Your pop culture questions. What started this series of pop culture questions?
Well, first of all, I love pop culture. And one of the things that you may or may not know about me is that my goal in life is to be a game show host. Like that's kind of just what I really like to be doing.
Working out?
It's not working out really well. Like all of this other distraction, this political discussion about the Ukraine is not helping my quest to be a game show host. But at any rate, one of the things, that I noticed as somebody who likes to host and interact and whatnot is that Twitter, I know you find this surprising, is sometimes a real dark place. And it has a lot of very negative interaction. And so I found that, especially like with nostalgia and pop culture, it's like a shared experience that we all have, and we can all playfully yell at each other without taking it seriously. So I just wanted to up my positive engagement. So there were a couple things I did. One of them is the questions, which a lot of them are around pop culture, although my recent one was about JFK getting killed and who you thought did it. And that's wacko. By the way, that's like a great read of those kinds of things.
I thought the last one was Seinfeld's girlfriend, but I forgot about that one.
We had that one. And then the other thing I'd like to do for a while was like share these really funny animal videos with like funny captions. The problem is I kept getting DCMA copyright hits from Twitter because the person who made it on TikTok, I guess, had the okay to use the music, but it's not okay to use it on Twitter. And I'm like, fuck this. I don't want to lose my Twitter account over like, some sort of Lhasa Up. So with Justin Bieber in the background. So I just went through and deleted like all of my animal videos, which is sad. So I'm going to stick to the pop culture questions, but it's just really meant to have a better, more fun way to engage and interact, which I think was what social media was supposed to be for. And like, you can argue in a cute, funny way, like, how could you believe that, that character is great or that movie was great? And like, nobody takes it too serious. Every once in a while, I did have one question about like high school. And there was a woman who was like, why do you care about what happened in high school? Grow the fuck up, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, you sound fun and normal.
Right.
But for the most part.
Shamika would say, were you fat? That's not me. I was me channeling my inner Shamika.
Right. So
exactly.
Yeah, no, I always say something like what's it like to not have any sense of humor whatsoever and be soulless?
Right.
Like what I wonder what that feels, those kinds of things. But yeah, so it's just meant to be fun and engaging.
Well, it is.
You just said the word fuck, so I'm glad I followed you because we're gonna get along fine.
Definitely. Well, she is Carol Roth, author of The War on Small Business, TV pundit, and New York Times bestselling author. Carol, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. And let's just do a shout out Purchase this at your local small business bookseller,
Yeah,
or
what's the
if you're
website you give?
lazy and you want to go online, bookshop.org will fulfill from a local small business bookseller, and you can be lazy like that other company but not give your dollars to the big guys. So
Hey, can they get race crazy and hate crime hoax there too?
you should check with your
There
publisher.
you go.
I got a country to say, 'cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.